You're listening to It's About Data, conversations with Tony Baer and Matt Housley. This episode, we're discussing the recently announced partnership between SAP and Databricks. So yeah, this is our, Tony, this is our inaugural episode here. After a lot of conversations at conferences and various bars in New York, we decided to create this show to kind of respond to news, and eventually I think we'll have guests on. So we hope we get a positive response to this first episode and also feedback to say where people would like to see this go. Why don't you introduce today's topic, which I think a lot of people are already aware of, very much in the air.
Yeah, this is a topic which I attempt to say needs almost no introduction. All I have to do is say SAP Databricks, and you have two very, very powerful companies with very large constituencies. That should explain it.
Yes. And I think some other context here is that one is like one of the juggernauts of old school enterprise software. You're talking like IBM, Oracle, SAP. What was it I read? Is SAP the world's largest software company by some metrics?
Well, they have the most business transaction data of any software company. They basically say that, and like from 75 to 80% of the world's business transaction data is in SAP systems.
Which is a huge amount of data. Yeah, so they have this massive presence. On the other hand, I think it's fair to say that anytime you're a big software juggernaut that's been around for decades, you also have to think about how do we stay up to date on the latest technological developments. And I think that matters a lot in the context of this partnership because Databricks is very much like they're huge now, right? But they're still a startup. They are out of Silicon Valley. They're based on Spark, like new generation big data technology. They employ a lot of very young engineers. They're this hard driving company trying to build out to become an enterprise juggernaut themselves, I would argue.
Right. Well, you could say all is the same thing. Actually, I don't think I would call them a startup anymore, but compared to SAP, yeah. But actually, where that would apply was when they came to their first partnership with Microsoft back around the 2015, 2016 timeframe, something like that. Or I may be off on my years. Then they really were a startup, and even though Microsoft has a reputation of being newer than SAP, they're not that much younger than SAP.
Yeah. They started by basically redefining the personal computing space coming into the 80s, and then they turned into a massive enterprise software company. But yeah, at this point, they're a juggernaut that has gone from strength to strength, but they've been around for a while and they're very, very established. Let's talk a bit about this concept of second party. So I remember when the Databricks Azure partnership was announced, part of the big deal was that Databricks was second party in Azure. And this new partnership is also a second party partnership, the way I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very well put this way. The circumstances were very different.
Yeah,
there are some common threads. When Databricks came together with Azure, it was very much Azure putting them on the map.
Yes.
And they were a $30 million company at the time.
Yeah.
Today, basically, Databricks is roughly a $3 billion company. I mean, at least in revenue, market valuation, at least about 10x that. But the thing is that in both cases, in Microsoft's case, it was the cloud infrastructure, the Azure infrastructure, and all the services that went with it. In SAP's case, it's a matter of basically working with the business data. So there's some differences there. And the thing is that data, the semantics of that data is highly complex. I mean, you take a look at it. I mean, even when you're looking at, let's say, modern SAP data, where at least they're going more towards clean core, and still the hierarchies and the interrelationships are so complex that you can't easily translate that through some tool that reads a database schema. That just is not going to give you the picture.
Yeah, exactly. And this reminds me of something I saw. So there was a press release from SAP and there was a press release from Databricks. And in SAP's press release, one of the things they talk about is like data warehouse modernization. And I think it fits right in with this issue that you bring up because the SAP data is so complex. It's hard even to update your business schema in SAP. It's like it's this massive machine, right, that works extremely well, but it's hard to make changes to it. And one of the things they mentioned, this use case of business warehouse modernization with Databricks, the assumption being that you have so much horsepower now that you can like change, you can denormalize, you can create new schemas and models off of the base data by using this very high-powered tool with deep integration into SAP.
Well, let's just say it is that, but it's also more than that. In
Mm-hmm.
that, with SAP, it depends on what generation of
Yeah,
SAP you're on, and also what generation of your architecture. Because in the past, of course, code was intermixed. When you had the old ABAP clusters,
yeah,
essentially code was intermixed with the data. And in the more modern, with S4, the idea is okay, you separated the code from the data, but then there was the issue of customizations, and that's it really speaks exactly to the issue you're talking about, which is
yeah,
that if you customize that code and that code and that customization is written into the core code, when you have to go through a version upgrade, you have to worry about are those customizations going to break, and that was really the key of why
yeah,
upgrade for SAP clients was never a simple thing. It's often like a process that could take like a year or two, depending or even more, depending on the size of the deployment, the breadth of it. Um, but I would say that so that's certainly a key part of it. But the other thing, as I said before, is that what we're also talking about here is a meeting of different worlds, which is that
yes,
SAP has essentially business analysts, business end users, knowledge workers, transaction workers. Databricks has really been a domain of data engineers and data scientists.
yep,
The Spark and the Python coders. Very different worlds, but yet they have to meet us. And what's forced them to meet is AI. And so Databricks for a number of years has been darn serious about really about bridging to the getting to the
yep,
business analysts, which really is fuels their whole rivalry with Snowflake.
yes,
The fact is that in this case, SAP was not. I mean, for obvious reasons, SAP is not the rival that Snowflake is. There is overlap between SAP's data warehousing and Databricks, basically Databricks SQL, but it's relatively a peripheral overlap. The fact is they both serve very different groups of customers, even within the same organization. So there's
yep.
by practically no channel conflict. By the way, that's a huge difference in the Databricks relationship between SAP and, say, for instance, Microsoft. With SAP, almost no channel conflict. Um, and so that's what really, and that, and plus the fact that Databricks customers actually really kind of demanded this, which is that we want to get access to that SAP data, and the existing tools just aren't cutting it. That was really what drove this.
Yeah, and I mean, having worked with similar situations with SAP data, how do I say this nicely? The reputation is that it is a bit hard to get the data out of SAP into other tools. And so now Databricks has this front row seat, all access, or maybe backstage pass is the more appropriate metaphor. Like they have direct access to all this data. And they have this sort of preferred
Yeah.
package where SAP is helping them to do this, helping with them with the schema and everything else.
But to do that, they had to go inside the SAP tent,
Yes, and
literally.
that's very interesting because that's the second party part I was talking about. And essentially what that means from a business perspective is that you don't actually have to deal directly with Databricks. Within the SAP cloud, which runs on top of like AWS
Hmm.
or Azure, you have this platform. And right there, you can click a button to get Databricks just right through that interface. So that's
Right.
frankly very beneficial for Databricks, but also a lot for them to give away to like transfer that business relationship to a partner.
Right. I know the culture of that company,
Yeah,
and the fact is that, and for both companies, they're not going to enter into partnerships like this lightly. I
right.
mean, either way. I mean, there are different ramifications, for SAP, for Databricks, but still, either way, the common thread is this is a type of relationship you don't enter into very lightly, and you're not going to do a
Yeah,
lot of them. I mean, I don't expect either of them to do anything to repeat this act,
right.
going forward. For Databricks, essentially, I mean, they've they now have a very strongly independent streak. I mean, they always have. I mean, it's been
Right.
their culture. Back in the teens when they were a $30 million company, they pretty much had to look at the kindness of strangers. Today they're a $3 billion company. They're the hot growth one,
Yeah.
in data science, and analytics. And so no, today they're not going to give up their autonomy very easily. And so the fact is that this really was, I'm not going to call it a shotgun marriage per se, because
Yeah.
I mean, because it would be a shotgun marriage if there was channel conflict. The fact is there is not channel conflict. Um, it means that Databricks, basically Databricks customers now get, basically native access, first party access to this data. So I see this as a win-win, but at the same time, it is a very much of, for Databricks, which is fiercely independent, it required basically, basically having a cooler head.
Yeah.
And I'll add one other thing to that, which is that Ali, is very competitive. He's also very pragmatic. You
Mm.
see that here with SAP. You also see that with how they're approaching Iceberg. Same thing.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I would say that interop is the word now, data sharing partnerships,
Mm-hmm.
strategic partnerships. They're not going to give everyone this kind of access. They're certainly not going to give Snowflake this kind of access, but
Ain't going to happen
strategic
every day.
partnership. Yeah. And there's history here. And I think it's very interesting to
Yes.
contextualize this in the history. And personally, I actually was a part of this as kind of a customer. I was working with a company back about 2016, 2017, where we were using Snowflake and Databricks. And back then,
Mm.
they were friends, right? And they had this, I don't know how
Yes.
formal it ever was, but there was definitely an informal partnership where you
Right.
could store your data in Snowflake, and then Databricks would process it when you wanted to do stuff that was more complicated than SQL.
Right.
And the sales teams would come in together. And then all of a sudden, there was a big breakup. And Databricks announced, we actually got early access to this as a customer because I think Databricks wanted to get some of our data warehousing workloads. But they announced fall 2017 Delta. It was just called Delta back then.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to bring that was kind of the beginning of this lakehouse
Yes.
concept where you had a data warehouse that would run on the data lake. And it took a long time to fully come to fruition, frankly.
Yes.
But I see this as kind of a development in that journey. It's not so much that SAP is just a data warehousing company, but they're like core enterprise. They're very much that kind of market
Right.
that a Teradata would also be in, for example, or Oracle. Big companies that have very specific data needs, that need ultra high reliability, that don't change products very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're seeing, like you said, not a shotgun wedding, but a very well thought out strategic move
Right.
with this history with Snowflake in the rearview mirror, where I'm sure Ali is thinking about that, about how that went down and how this
Yes.
partnership is going to be very, very different.
Right. Well, the thing is, look, at the time, it's always, hindsight is always 2020.
Yeah.
And at the time, both Snowflake and Databricks were startups. I mean, they both were founded within a year of each other. Snowflake
Yeah.
actually grew faster initially than Databricks.
They did. Yeah. And that's part of the reason there was that pivot, because Databricks was like, at least the way I interpreted what I heard coming from the executives and the salespeople, they wanted those traditional data warehouse workloads. They didn't
Yes.
just want to be a data science or a machine learning tool.
Right.
They wanted like the heavy duty, this is all your business data type
Mhm.
workloads.
Mhm. Yeah, no question about that. And the thing is, number one, the initial opportunity was getting to because the business analysts, data warehousing was the established market. And so it was a very and the thing is that there was a big pain point for early Databricks customers, which that Spark SQL is kind of a toy.
Yep.
And they need something more serious there just to basically solve their problem. And it happened later for Snowflake customers because, of course, even though machine learning has been a reality with us, for probably at least the past 10 or 12 years,
Yeah.
Especially with generative AI coming on, all of a sudden AI has become a front burner issue. And now we need to have some real serious iron there.
Yeah.
And so that raised the stakes for Snowflake, that they really need to develop a more credible data science story, an AI story, which is what
Yep.
their
Yep.
container services were all about, which is now maybe about 2 years old. So yeah, the fact is that the other thing too is also both companies starting to grow to certain sizes. It made them more natural rivals at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And, part of, I mean, to be perfectly honest, having worked with Databricks back then, Databricks was very focused on like the sexy big data workloads, right? But the core stuff like schema management and data change management and like those kinds of things they were not so good at, which was where Snowflake would really shine. And I would say that like Databricks really pulled ahead of Snowflake when the Gen AI craze began. Snowflake had been working on an ML story for a while.
Right.
And frankly, the Databricks ML story was just a lot more compelling. And if you can deliver that with data warehousing, then it's even more, then it's even more compelling at that point.
Yeah, I think we've opened another Pandora's box. We've talked at least for an hour about what I would call Snowbricks, and actually we'll update that conversation in June.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. But I think we hit anything else you want to talk about on this?
I think at this point, no. I think what's interesting with getting back to our original topic, is that it's just interesting to see the essentially the trajectory of both SAP and Databricks, on how these are two fiercely independent companies with two fiercely independent cultures, and realizing they need each other.
Yeah. It totally makes sense. And I'm just going to mention a couple of things from the Snowflake side, because I think this is an interesting story that we will revisit soon. So Sridhar Ramaswamy was made the CEO about a year ago now, back in February 2024. I think a lot of that was because of this very story about machine learning that Databricks does very well. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how Snowflake responds to this in the future.
Yes.
I think they're going to keep fighting, and this is going to be a battle royale probably for the next decade or more. These companies will pull ahead of each other, right? That's the reality. Another interesting announcement yesterday is that Sam Altman is going to be keynoting Snowflake Summit, the upcoming Snowflake Summit. So obviously, again, a counter move to this as I see it. Also, Snowflake about a week ago, announced a partnership with Strata. Smaller than, arguably much smaller than SAP, but still it's part of this whole culture of like collaboration that both companies, this process of collaboration that both companies have to engage in now.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have a lot more to chew on in a few months.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah. But look forward to getting this posted and seeing comments and responses and having a conversation online about this.
And my video equipment will finally arrive when we do our next chapter.
Yes, that's right. You have everything except the hub to get your camera and microphone.
No, the hub. Actually, I just got the notice right now. The hub just got delivered to the door. An hour and a day, literally an hour and a day late.
Okay. So had we done this like 2 hours later, we might have perfect audio and video.
Then it would be in living color.
Yeah. But this is just fine. So
good talking.
Yeah, great chat. Talk to you soon.